My name is Cora Vance, and the story I'm about to tell you starts on the morning I stopped belonging to anybody at all. It was a Tuesday in March. I remember that much. I remember the cold of the metal chair under me and the smell of the office burnt coffee and carpet cleaner, the kind that never really cleans anything. And I remember the pen, a cheap blue pen, chewed at the cap. I signed my name with it, over and over. Cora Vance, Cora Vance, Cora Vance. Each signature was a door closing somewhere behind me. Release forms, liability waivers, a final status checklist with little boxes that somebody, somewhere, needed checked so the state of Montana could be finished with me. That was my 18th birthday. No cake, no candles, just paperwork. And a woman named Miss Audra Quill, who'd been my caseworker for 4 years, and who looked at me the way people look at a clock when they're waiting on a bus. "You're all set, Cora," she said. All set. For 10 years, the system had been the only home I knew. 10 years since my father died. 10 years of strangers' houses and strangers' rules, of bags packed in the dark, of learning not to put pictures on the wall because you never knew how long you'd be in that room. And now it was over, just like that. They handed me a check for $200 in a printed list of shelters down in Missoula, and they showed me the door. But before I left, Miss Quill pushed something across the desk. A box, gray cardboard, dusty, the kind of box you keep old tax records in. And on the side, in faded black marker, somebody had written two words, Vence Kelda. My father's name. These are his personal effects, she said. They've been in county storage. We're required to release them to you when you turn 18. I stared at that box. 10 years. In 10 years, nobody had ever once mentioned it. That's it? My voice came out smaller than I wanted? That's everything? She gave a little shrug, the kind that's meant to look like sympathy, but is really just tired. His landlord packed it after the accident. Far as the record shows, that's all of it. Mostly books, I think. She slid one last form toward me. Sign here. It's a receipt. So I signed my name one more time, and just like that, I owned a box belonging to a dead man. I could barely remember. I want to stop right here for just a moment, because some of you listening already know what it feels like to hold the very last piece of somebody you loved, to hold it in your two hands, and not be sure whether you want to open it or not. If that's you, if you've ever stood at the edge of a thing, you were afraid to look inside, then I hope you'll stay with me tonight. Because what I found in that box changed everything. All right, let me go on. I spent my last night at the group home sitting on the floor of my little white room with that box in front of me like it might bite. I'll tell you the truth. I was afraid of it. I was afraid it would prove the story I'd been told my whole life, that my father, Calder Vance, was a drifter. A man with no roots and no plans, who died on a logging crew up in the Bitterroot and left behind nothing but a daughter the county had to deal with. A good man, they always said. But the way you say it about somebody you don't really want to claim, if I opened that box and found nothing, then I came from nothing. But around midnight, when the house went quiet, I couldn't help myself. I pulled at the tape. It was old and brittle, and it cracked under my fingernails. And when the flap side opened, a smell came up out of it. Old paper, dust. And underneath all that faint, just a thread of it, cedar. I don't know how to tell you what that smell did to me. It was him. I knew it was him. Inside, it was just like she said. Books. Worn paperbacks, poetry and history, the spines cracked white. A stack of pay stubs from logging and construction outfits all over the western half of the state. A cheap watch with a broken face, the hand stopped at 217. A lighter that wouldn't spark. The leftovers of a life lived out of a truck. It was exactly the story I'd been told, and my heart started to sink. But then my fingers brushed the bottom of the box. And under everything, heavier than all the rest, was a Bible. Not a fancy one. Plain black leather, worn smooth and pale at the corners, the kind you find in the drawer of a motel room. There was no name stamped on the front, nothing to mark it as his at all. But I knew. I opened the cover, and there on the first thin page in careful blocky letters was his name, Calder Vance, and under it a date. The date I was born, I stopped breathing. That was his handwriting. In my whole life, I had never once seen my father's handwriting. I traced the letters with one finger. He had held this pen, he had pressed it into this page. He had written down the day his daughter came into the world. I turned the pages slow, careful, like they might tear. He wasn't a religious man, not that I remembered. So why this? Why keep a Bible? And then I felt it. Tucked deep in the middle of the book, between the pages of Proverbs, there was a little bulge, a square of paper, folded tight, gone yellow and stiff at the creases. My hands were shaking when I worked it loose. I unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a photograph. It was a deed. Across the top, in old printed script, were the words, "Quit claim deed." Below that, a long paragraph of language I didn't understand, sections and townships and ranges, and then a name, grantee, Calder Vance, and an address, not a street, a rural route, and the name of a town I had never once heard in my life. Cedar Hollow, Montana. I grabbed my phone. The screen lit up my whole dark room, blue. I typed it in with shaking fingers. Cedar Hollow. An unincorporated community in the Bitterroot foothills, 3 hours southeast of Missoula. The mill closed back in the 90s. Population, what the map called dwindling. A ghost town, more or less. And on this piece of paper, my father, the man with no roots and no plans, owned 63 acres of it. A farmhouse, a barn, 63 acres of land. I read it 3 times, and then the anger came, hot and fast, rising up from somewhere deep down. Because for 10 years I had been a ward of the state. I'd been shuffled house to house, told to be grateful, told there was nothing, no family, nowhere to go. And the whole time there was a place that was his, a place that was by law mine, and nobody told me, that's the first thing I want you to sit with. The way I had to, my father, the man everybody called a drifter, he secretly owned a farm, and he hid the deed to it inside a Bible, and he made sure it wouldn't reach my hands until the very day I turned 18. Why? I want you to tell me down in the comments, if it were you, would you have gone looking, or would you have been too afraid of what you might find? Because I'll be honest with you, at 1:45 in the morning with $200 to my name and a list of homeless shelters in my bag, I made my choice. There was one last thing I had to do first, and it broke a little piece of me. Down the hall, in a room smaller than mine, slept my brother, Silas Vance, 15 years old. The only blood I had left in this world. We'd been split up when our father died. They couldn't find one home that would take the both of us, so they didn't try very hard. For years we lived in different houses, different towns. But the last 2 years, by some accident of paperwork, we'd landed in the same county system, close enough that we saw each other most weekends, close enough that he'd become the one person on this earth I would have walked through fire for. And now I was leaving him behind. That was the rule. I was 18, I was out, he was a minor, he stayed. I went into his room, and I sat on the edge of his bed, and I watched him sleep for a while. He looked younger asleep. He had our father's dark hair, and the same stubborn jaw, and a little scar over his left eyebrow from a fight he never would explain. I didn't wake him. I couldn't. If I woke him, I would never be able to leave. I just leaned down, and I whispered that I'd come back for him. And then I picked up my bag and the box, and I walked out into the dark. I told myself it was the right thing. I told myself I'd send for him once I knew it was safe. I should have known my brother better. Silas Vance never once in his life waited around for anybody to come back for him. The bus station at dawn is a kind of purgatory, diesel and disinfectant, hard plastic seats, people scattered around with the same look on their faces, half exhaustion, half the plain refusal to give up. I fit right in. I bought a ticket to a town called Darby, the closest stop the route would take me. The man behind the counter had to look up Cedar Hollow on a paper map. "Not much out there, hon," he said. "You sure?" I wasn't sure of anything, but I nodded. The bus pulled out as the sky was going from black to gray. I watched the city peel away. First the strip malls, then the fields, then the dark wall of pines, climbing up into the foothills. Rain started to streak the windows, turning the whole world into a smear of green and gray. I kept my hand in my pocket, wrapped around the deed. I'd taken a photo of it on my phone, but I needed the paper. I needed to feel the real thing under my fingers. It was the only solid object in a morning that felt like a dream. I'd never been outside the city in my life. I was a creature of concrete and bus exhaust and fluorescent hallways. All that green out the window scared me as much as it pulled at me. And then, somewhere around the second hour, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't know. Don't be mad. I frowned at it, and then a second one came through. Look in the back. My whole body went cold. I turned around in my seat, slow, and there, 4 rows back, hunched down low in a hoodie, 2 sizes too big, was my brother. Silas. He gave me a little wave. A guilty, defiant 15-year-old wave. So that's the second thing I never saw coming. My little brother had followed me. He'd seen the deed on the kitchen counter the weekend before when I came to say goodbye. He'd memorized the name of the town, and when I slipped out in the dark, he slipped out right behind me. He'd gotten himself on this bus, and he'd been sitting 4 rows back the whole time, watching me, waiting for the right moment. I should have been furious. And I was. But I'll tell you the honest truth. When I saw his face back there, the very first thing I felt before the fear, before the anger, was that I wasn't alone anymore. And God help me, that was the most dangerous feeling of all, because now I wasn't just a runaway. Now I had taken a 15-year-old ward of the state across 3 counties, without a single soul knowing where he was. I just turned myself into something the law has a very ugly word for. You have to go back, I told him. Once I dragged him up to the seat beside me. No, he said. Silas, they'll come looking, they'll think they won't even notice for a week, he said. And the awful thing was, he was probably right. Cora, he was my dad too. And that shut me right up, because it was true. Whatever was waiting for us out in Cedar Hollow, it belonged to him just as much as it belonged to me. The deed didn't have my name on it, it had our father's name on it. And we were both his. So I didn't send him back. I couldn't. I just reached over and pulled his hood down and made him sit up straight like a human being. And we rode the rest of the way up into the mountains together, side by side, the way it should have been all along. The bus let us off at the Darby Junction, under a tin-roofed lean-to, at the edge of an empty highway. A single weathered sign pointed off down a smaller, cracked road. Cedar Hollow 12. 12 miles. It might as well have said 100. The rain had eased to a cold mist that crept down the back of my collar. There was no other traffic, no signal on my phone, just the drip of water off the pines and the enormous, pressing silence of a place with no people in it. We walk? I said. So we walked for what felt like hours. Our shoes soaked through, the cold got down into our bones, a couple of cars passed and didn't slow. I started to think this was the stupidest thing anybody had ever done, and that I'd dragged my little brother right into the middle of it. And then, just as the light was starting to fail, a truck slowed down beside us. An old Ford, faded to the color of a robin's egg, with bags of feed and a couple of muddy buckets rattling in the bed. The window rolled down with an electric whine. And out leaned an old woman with a great white cloud of hair and a face mapped with 1,000 fine lines. You two are going to catch your death, she said. Her voice was rough as gravel and warm as a stove. Where on earth are you headed? Cedar Hollow, I said, my teeth chattering. We're looking for a property. The old Vance place. The woman went very still. Her eyes, a startling bright blue, moved from me to Silas and back to me again. Calder Vance's place, she said softly. Lord, have mercy. And then she said, the thing that stopped my heart, you've got his eyes, the both of you, you've got Calder's eyes. Her name was Maribeth Doss. She kept goats, she told us. And she made pottery she sold at the markets down in the valley in the summertime. And she'd lived a mile down the road from the Vance place for going on 40 years. The cab of her truck smelled like hay and coffee and wet dog, and it was the warmest place I had ever been in my life. She didn't ask us a lot of questions. I think she could tell we didn't have the answers yet ourselves. She just drove, slow and careful, up roads that turned from cracked asphalt to gravel to dirt, past a few houses with lights in the windows, and then past nothing at all, just trees. "Your daddy," she said finally, watching the road. "Nobody set foot on that land in 10 years. Maybe more." She glanced over at us. "You sure you want to see it? It holds a lot of history, that place. A lot of hurt." "We're sure," I said. She nodded, slow and sad, like she understood. She pulled over at the mouth of a lane that was barely a lane at all. Just 2 rotting fence posts and a track swallowed up in blackberry and fern. "That's it," she said. "House is probably still standing. Calder built it to last. He was the finest builder I ever saw." Then she did something I will never forget. She reached into her glove box and pulled out a heavy flashlight and a scrap of paper she scribbled a number on. "The power's been off for years," she said. "You take this, and you take my number. I'm 1 mile back the way we came. The green roof, you can't miss it." She looked hard at the both of us. "Anything happens, anything at all, you come find me, day or night. You hear me?" I took the flashlight. My hand was numb. "Thank you, Maribeth," I said. "You look after each other," she said, and with one last worried look at the 2 of us, she put the truck in gear and rolled away into the dark. And then it was just me and Silas, standing at the head of our father's land, in the rain, with one flashlight between us. The lane was a green tunnel. Blackberry canes reached out and snagged at our jackets like fingers. The ground was soft and spongy underfoot, 10 years of fallen needles. And the smell was thick, wet earth, rotting wood, and something growing wild and green over the top of it all. 100 yards in, the trees opened up, and there it was. The house, it wasn't a ruin. Not quite. It stood there in the middle of a clearing. 2 stories of dark, weathered wood, square and solid. But the porch roof sagged in the middle, where a post had rotted out. One upstairs window was broken, a black, jagged hole open to the weather. A climbing rose, gone completely wild, had swallowed half the front wall in thorns. To the left of the house stood a barn, bigger, the roof line still straight and true. The whole place was quiet, the slow, patient kind of quiet, where the forest is taking something back an inch at a time. It was heartbreaking, and it was beautiful. It looked like a place that had been loved once, with everything somebody had, and then forgotten for a very long time. Beside me, Silas let out a long breath. "He built this?" he whispered. "He built this," I said. "Now I have to tell you about the door. Every door was locked. Every window on the ground floor was shut up tight. My father, just like Maribeth said, had built that house to last, and to keep people out. We walked the whole way around it twice in the rain, rattling knobs, and got nowhere. I was about ready to sit down and cry. And then my flashlight caught the chimney. It ran up the side of the house in fieldstone. And down near the bottom, one stone looked different from the others. A little cleaner, a little looser in the mortar. I don't know what made me do it. A feeling. I knelt down in the wet grass and I pushed on it. It moved. I worked my fingers into the gap and pulled, and the stone came free in my hands, heavy and cold. And there, in the dark hollow behind it, was a small metal box, rusted at the seams. My heart leapt right up into my throat. I pulled it out. Silas crowded in close. It was an old cash box with a flimsy little lock, and I didn't even need a key. I cracked it open against the stone in 2 hits. Inside, lying on a bed of dried moss, was a single iron key, old-fashioned, heavy, with a round head and a long-toothed shaft, like something out of a fairy tale, a key to a secret kingdom. We went back to the front door. My hand was shaking so bad that Silas had to steady it. I slid the key into the lock. It was a perfect fit, and with a heavy, satisfying clunk, the bolt drew back, and the door of my father's house swung open before me. on hinges that groaned like they were waking up from a 10-year sleep. Let me stop here, just for a breath, because I've been carrying this story a long time, and this is the part where I always have to slow down. We were standing on the threshold of a house our father built with his own two hands, a father we'd been told had nothing, was nothing, left nothing. And in just a few minutes, I was going to walk into those rooms and learn that everything I thought I knew about my own life was a lie. If you've ever found out that the story you were told about where you came from wasn't the true story, if you ever turned a corner in your own family and found a door you didn't know was there, then you know exactly how my heart was beating right then. Stay with me, because we're about to go inside. The air that met us was cold and still, and it smelled like trapped time. The flashlight beam cut through it, and the dust came alive in the light, swirling like tiny frantic stars. Everything wore a thick gray coat of it. By the door, a pair of muddy work boots stood waiting, right where a man had stepped out of them. A heavy coat hung from a peg. Straight ahead, a staircase climbed up into the dark. We went in slow. Our footsteps echoed. In the living room, the furniture stood under white sheets, like sleeping ghosts. I pulled one back, and a cloud of dust rolled up, and Silas coughed. Underneath was a sofa. Plain, sturdy, handmade. The whole room was like that. Simple things, built strong, built to last 100 years. The kitchen was a time capsule, a kettle on the stove, a coffee mug on the counter next to a jar with the dried-up brown remains of instant coffee in the bottom. It looked like somebody had just stepped out for a minute. Not for 10 years. It was so ordinary it hurt. This was a life, a quiet, solitary, real life. My father's life that he'd built out here in secret while I grew up 200 miles away, thinking he'd left me nothing. And then we found the office. It was a small room off the living room, and unlike all the others, it wasn't draped in sheets. It was left exactly the way a man leaves a room he means to come back to, and a wooden desk under the window, a chair tucked in, a pen lying ready next to a clean blotter, one book open and face down like he'd just set it aside, and on the wall above the desk was a corkboard. I lifted the flashlight up to it, and I forgot how to breathe. It was covered in photographs of us, me as a baby, fat and bald and laughing, me at 3, taking my first wobbly steps on a patch of grass, me on my first day of school with a missing front tooth, and Silas as a newborn. Silas in a high chair with food all over his face. Silas at 5, holding a fishing pole, almost as tall as he was. Pictures we had never seen. Pictures that did not exist anywhere else in the entire world. Pictures somebody had to have driven a long, long way to take in secret, from a distance. And in between the photos, there were newspaper clippings, a school honor roll with my name circled in pen, a grainy little photo of Silas's Pee-wee soccer team, a clipping about a science fair. He had been watching all those years. All those years I thought I was forgotten, thought I was nothing, thought nobody on earth knew whether I lived or died. My father had been out there in the dark the whole time, watching us grow up. From a distance? Always from a distance. I heard a sound beside me, and I realized it was Silas, my little brother, my tough little brother with a scar over his eye who never let anybody see him cry. He was crying, silent, shaking, with his hand pressed over his mouth. And then I was crying too. We stood there in that dusty room, 2 kids the state had given up on, and we cried for the father who never once gave up on us. We cried for all the birthdays, all the missed steps, all the years we'd had a dad who loved us so much that he built a whole house to wait in, and we never knew. We never knew. We never knew. When the crying finally wore itself out, I felt scraped clean, empty, and ringing like a bell after it stops. And my eyes fell on the desk. Next to that open book was a small box, cedar-lined. The lid wasn't even locked. I lifted it. Inside, on a bed of faded blue velvet, were 2 things. A stack of letters tied up with a piece of twine, and a little cassette recorder, the kind they had 30 years ago, with a single tape inside it. And on the tape, in his blocky hand, one word, children. The top letter in the stack was addressed too, for Cora and Silas. On Cora's 18th birthday, he'd known, somehow 10 years ago, he had known I'd find my way to this room on this day. And he'd left a letter waiting. I picked up that recorder, and I knew with a deep, cold certainty that my father's voice was on that tape. 10 years of silence, sitting in a box, waiting for me, but I wasn't ready for his voice, not yet. The letter first. I held it in my two hands, and the paper was thick and good, not the cheap stuff from the group home, and I made myself slide my thumb under the flap. And that's where I'm going to pause and let you catch your breath. The way I had to, because in the next part of this story, I'm going to read you what my father wrote, and it changed everything I thought I knew. I sat down in my father's chair. Silas sat on the floor beside me, his knee up against my leg, the way he used to when he was little, and there was thunder. I set the flashlight on the desk so it made a pool of light, and I unfolded the letter. It was dated 2 weeks before he died. I had to read that date twice, to be sure. He wrote this knowing his time was short. My dear Cora, my dear Silas, it began. And right there, at the very first line, my throat closed up, because nobody had ever in my whole life called me dear. If you are reading this, it means two things. First, it means that I am gone, and for that, my children, I am more sorry than any words can carry. The thought of leaving the two of you alone in the world is the only thing that ever truly frightened me. And second, it means you found your way home. Home, he called it home. You were always clever, Cora. I knew you'd solve the puzzle. And Silas, if I know you at all, you found a way to be standing right there beside her. You never could stand to be left behind. I looked down at my brother on the floor, and he looked up at me, and neither one of us could speak. I know you have questions, the letter went on. I know the story you were told about me, a man who lived small and died small and left nothing behind. For a long time, it was important that the world believe that story. It was the only way I could keep you safe. But it isn't the truth. The truth is harder. The flashlight flickered. I tapped it until it steadied. And I kept reading. And the letter took me somewhere I never expected to go. My father wrote that he didn't have a good start, that his own father was a hard man, and the company he kept was harder, that as a young man he got tangled up in things, owed money to the wrong kind of people. Not the kind who send you a bill in the mail. The kind who can make a person disappear if a debt goes unpaid. And then you came along, he wrote, first you, Cora, and 4 years later, Silas. And holding the two of you, I knew I could not be that man anymore. I could not let that life come anywhere near yours. So I ran, I took the both of you, and I disappeared. I changed how we lived. I took work that paid in cash. We never stayed anywhere more than a few months. We were ghosts, the three of us. And the whole time I was saving every dollar I could put my hands on. Because I had a dream of a place so far off the road that no one would ever find us, a place where you could finally stop running, where you could put down roots and grow. He was talking about the farm. He'd bought the land under his real name. The only clean thing he had left from his old life, he said, and he'd built the house himself, board by board. On weekends and stolen weeks, telling his bosses he was off visiting family he didn't have. It was our fortress, he wrote. I poured every ounce of love I had for the two of you into these walls. I painted a room, and I dreamed of the day I'd bring you here and show you the stars off the porch and teach you the names of the trees. I had to stop and press my hand over my eyes because I could see him. I could just see him alone in this clearing, hammering nails, raising beams, his head full of a future with his kids in it, a future that never came. And then the letter turned, and the floor dropped out from under me. But they found me, my children. The past has a long reach. I got word that they knew I had a family. They were going to use the two of you to get to me. And I had a choice to make. I could run again. But they would never stop looking, and you would never have a childhood, only a road. Or I could end it. I could cut the thread between my old life and your future so clean, so complete, that no one would ever come looking again. So I made a deal, a final one, to settle the debt for good. And I arranged the accident. I made it convincing. I paid the right people to be sure the story would hold. It cost me everything I had, and it cost me my life. I stopped reading. The room tilted around me. The accident, my whole life, I'd been told it was an accident, a logging accident, a falling tree, a bad day, bad luck. It wasn't, it was a choice. It was a sacrifice. My father had walked into his own death, on purpose, to pay a debt, to break a chain, to make sure the dangerous men who knew his name would close the file and forget he'd ever had children at all. He hadn't left us. He had died so that we could live. I read that part out loud to Silas, because I couldn't hold it by myself. And when I got to the end of it, my brother put his face down against my knee and didn't make a sound. And I put my hand in his hair, and we just stayed like that for a long, long time. I need to stop here. I know this is a hard thing to hear. I had to sit with it a long time myself before I could even begin to understand it. But I want to ask you something. While we catch our breath together, what would you have done if you were a parent and you knew the only way to keep your children safe was to disappear from their lives completely? Would you have the strength to do it? To let them grow up thinking you had abandoned them? Hating you, maybe? So long as they were alive to do the hating? I don't know if I could. If you've ever loved somebody enough to let them go, to step out of their life because you believed it was the only way to protect them, I would dearly love to hear about it in the comments. Because I think the people who've done that are some of the bravest people alive, and the world almost never thanks them for it. All right, let me finish the letter, because it ends with a gift. The last part was steadier, like he'd cried himself out by the time he wrote it. The only thing I couldn't part with was this land, he wrote. There was no money left over. It all went to settle the debt. Everything except what I'd already set aside for the two of you, hidden where only you could find it. That money was never mine to spend. It was always yours. So I had to do the hardest thing I have ever done. I had to trust the system to take care of you, and I had to trust that one day you'd be old enough and strong enough to handle the truth. I set it so the box would come to you the day you turned 18, Cora. I hoped you'd find the deed. I hoped you'd be brave enough to come. This house, this land, it's all I have to give you. It's probably in rough shape by now. There are surely back taxes owed, and tangles I can't see from here. People may even try to take it from you. But it's yours. It was bought, and it was built with love. And what you do with it is up to you. You can sell it and walk away and never look back. You can start fresh somewhere far from here, and there would be no shame in that. None at all. Or you can stay. You can make it the home I always dreamed it would be. The choice is yours. It's the only real gift I have left to give. A choice. And then, at the bottom, whatever you decide, know that I have loved you every single second of every single day. Be good to each other. Be brave. Your father, Kelda. I folded that letter up with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and I put it back in its envelope, and I set it on the desk. The room wasn't empty anymore. It was full of him. He'd given us a choice. Sell or stay. The easy road or the hard one. And for the first time in my whole life, somebody had handed me real power, and I had no earthly idea what to do with it. We slept that night in the living room, the two of us, wrapped up in dusty quilts on the floor, in front of a cold fireplace, too tired and too wrung out to do anything else. And I dreamed of falling trees, and a man's voice I couldn't quite hear. Morning came gray and thin through the dirty windows. We were stiff and cold, and our stomachs were hollow, and the whole impossible situation came crashing back down on us. No power, no food but a few old cans, no money, and a decision to make that felt far too big for two kids to carry. Part of me wanted to run, to walk back down that lane and hitch to the highway and go back to the gray, predictable misery of the life I already knew. But I thought about that corkboard. I thought about a man alone in this clearing, building a future he would never get to see. And I knew I couldn't run. "We can't leave," Silas said, before I could even say it. He was standing at the window looking out at the wild yard. "Cora, this is the only place that was ever ours." He was 15 years old, and he was right. So instead of running, we started to learn the place. We pumped the well by hand, out back, and after a while of muddy water, it ran clear and cold and clean, a victory. We found a deep pantry, stocked with canned beans and stew and peaches. All of it years expired, but a few cans still good enough. Emergency rations my father had laid in, thinking even of this. And then we went out to the barn. The barn was a treasure house. A whole wall of tools hung neat on a pegboard, saws and hammers and drills, a generator under a tarp, a stack of good lumber, cut and stacked and waiting. My father hadn't just left us a house. He'd left us everything we'd need to fix it. And then, in the back corner, behind a pile of old tarps, Silas found something that didn't belong. A footlocker, military style, heavy steel painted olive green, and locked with a combination padlock. We both went quiet, because the first thing I thought of was the wrong people, the dangerous past. What if this was a piece of it? What if we were about to open something we'd be sorry we ever found? We dragged it out into the middle of the floor. There was no way to force it, the lock was heavy duty, and we'd only break our hands trying. A combination. We needed a combination, and I thought of the Bible. The deed had been hidden in Proverbs. Was that random, or was it a clue? I ran back to the house and grabbed it, and flipped to the front page, where my father had written his name, and I looked at it closer than I had before. And there, almost invisible, pressed into the paper under the date I saw them, pin pricks, tiny holes, made with a needle, 3 of them, under the numbers of a date, but not my birthday. This date was Silas's. His birthday is the 8th of September, 908, and there my father had pricked the 9 and the 0 and the 8. 908. A crazy long shot. But it was all we had. We ran back to the barn. I knelt down by the footlocker, and my fingers were trembling so bad I could hardly turn the little wheels. 908. I pulled. The lock clicked open. I want you to understand what that meant. Our father had hidden a clue to me in the date I was born, the location of the deed, and he'd hidden a clue to Silas in the date that he was born. The combination to this lock, he'd made a puzzle that took the both of us. Like he'd known somehow that whatever happened in those 10 years, we'd find our way back to each other, that we would open it together. I have never in my life been so proud of anything as I was of my father in that moment. So proud and so heartbroken and so loved, all at the very same time that I thought my chest would crack right open. I lifted the lid, and again, it wasn't what I expected. No money, no guns, no dark secret from the dangerous past. Books, textbooks, thick, serious ones. Agricultural science, soil management, crop rotation, raising chickens, small-scale forestry, plumbing, wiring, carpentry, dozens of them, dog-eared and underlined and stuffed full of handwritten notes in the margins, and on top, one more letter, shorter than the first. My children, if you're reading this, you've decided to stay. I knew you would. You've got my stubbornness, both of you. I never got to be a farmer, but I studied. I wanted to do it right. Everything I learned is in this box. This is how you build a life here. This is the manual for your home. Learn from my dreams. And one last thing, look under the floorboards in the small bedroom upstairs, the one painted yellow. Under the loose board by the window, there's one more piece. The part that will let you fight for this place. I love you, Dad. We found the yellow room, upstairs, at the end of the hall. And when I pushed open the door, I had to lean against the frame, just to stay standing, because it was a child's room, two children's room. The walls were painted a soft, cheerful yellow, and in the middle of the floor stood a rocking horse, hand-carved, sanded smooth as glass, its painted eyes looking at us like it had been waiting a very long time. He'd built it for us. He had painted the walls. He had carved a rocking horse for kids who never got to ride it. Silas walked over and put his hand on the horse's smooth back and rocked it, just a little, and it creaked in the silence. And I knelt down by the window, and I found the loose board, and I pried it up. Underneath, between the joists, was another metal box, bigger than the one with the key, heavier. I lifted it out, and it wasn't locked, and I opened it. It was full of money, stacks of cash, banded in paper, worn soft with handling. I didn't know how much, but it looked like more money than I'd ever seen in my life. And on top of it lay a single folded paper, a county tax assessment, 10 years old, with the annual amount circled, and beside the paper, a handwritten ledger. For years, my father had written it out, the estimated property tax, year after year, plus the interest, plus the penalties. He'd added it all up. And he had saved, to the dollar, the exact amount he thought it would take to make this place whole again. It wasn't a treasure. It was ammunition. He hadn't just left us the house, the tools, and the knowledge. He had left us the one thing he knew we'd need most when the fight finally came. He'd left us a fighting chance. So that was 4 gifts, the deed to bring us home, the tools, the knowledge, and now the money. I sat there on the floor of that yellow room with my brother beside me and my father's stacked up love all around us, and I felt the fear finally turn into something else. It turned into resolve. We were staying, we were going to fight for this place. The decision was made, and we had no idea yet just how big a fight it was going to be. The next morning I packed a bag with the cash box and the deed and the ledger. I wasn't about to leave that kind of money sitting in an empty house. And Silas and I walked the mile down the road to the green roof. Maribeth wasn't surprised to see us. She had coffee on and the wood stove going and a living room full of books and handmade quilts and the warm smell of something baking. Had a feeling you'd be by, she said, studying our faces. You look different than you did 2 days ago. We need to use your phone, I said, and I need to ask you some things. She handed me an old cordless phone, and then with a kindness I was only just beginning to understand, she took Silas off into the kitchen to feed him, and she gave me my privacy. My first call was to the county records office. The number was printed right there on that 10-year-old tax assessment. A bored-sounding clerk answered. I explained, as calm as I could, that I was the heir to the Vance property out on the old rural route, and that I needed to know the status of the back taxes. The silence on the other end went on a long time. Oh, honey, she said finally, and there was real pity in her voice, which scared me more than anything. That property's on the auction block. The tax sale is in 2 weeks. The floor dropped. 2 weeks? The amount owed is substantial. 10 years of unpaid taxes, plus interest, plus penalties, comes to $52,300 and change. She paused. Now, if the full amount gets paid before the sale, the property can be redeemed, but only by the legal heir. I'm the legal heir, I said. Are you now? A rustle of papers. According to our records, the property's still in the name of Calder Vance. To redeem it, you'd have to go through probate court and prove you're his next of kin. And, honey, that takes months. Usually, months. I had 2 weeks. I couldn't pay the taxes without proving I was the heir. And I couldn't prove I was the heir in time to pay the taxes. It was a perfect trap. A locked box with the key locked inside it, and then the clerk lowered her voice. Like she shouldn't be telling me at all. There's one other thing you ought to know. There's a company already put in a pre-sale bid on that land, Sutter Ridge Land Group. They've been buying up every old parcel in that valley. 2, 3 years now. Tax sales, mostly. She chose the word careful, motivated. Of course they were. This wasn't just paperwork left to rot. This was a hunt, and we had walked right into the middle of it. Let me stop here, because this is the moment everything hung in the balance. We had the money to save the farm, the exact amount, almost, 52,000, against a hidden box of cash our father saved $1 at a time. But we couldn't use it. Not in time. The law said so. And a land company with deep pockets and a hungry look was already circling, 2 weeks out, from taking everything our father died to leave us. If you've stayed with me this far, I need to ask you something. And I want you to answer me honest, down in the comments. What would you have done? Would you have stayed and fought a battle you almost certainly could not win? Or would you have taken what you could and walked away to keep your little brother safe? Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours and had the whole world stacked against you? Tell me. Hit that subscribe button and tell me your story. Because the ones you've already left me are the reason I found the courage to tell this at all. And then stay right here, because I'm about to tell you how 2 foster kids with no money and no lawyer took on a land company, and what it cost us to win. I walked into Maribeth's kitchen, and she took one look at my face and set down her dishcloth. "Bad news," she said. It wasn't a question. "The worst," I said, and I told her everything. The auction, the 2 weeks, the probate trap, the land company. She listened, slow and quiet, nodding. And when I was done, she poured me a cup of coffee and sat down across the table. 52,000, she said, mostly to herself. Calder always was good with numbers. He was, I said. And I opened my bag and I showed her the ledger and the box of cash. Her eyes went wide. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "He really did think of everything, didn't he?" "But it doesn't matter," I said, and I heard my own voice crack. "I can't use it. I can't prove we're his heirs in time. The court takes months. We have 2 weeks. Maribeth tapped one finger on the table, thinking, and then a slow smile started up in the corners of her eyes. "Probate court, down in the city, takes months," she said. "But Cedar Hollow isn't the city. Things move different up here." She leaned forward. "Our county judge, Adayaz Okafor. She's been on that bench 30 years. She knew your father. She knows everybody. And she has got no patience at all for what Sutter Ridge has been doing to the families in this valley." A little spark of hope lit up in my chest. "You think she'd help?" I think Maribeth said, "It's high time we paid her a visit. She holds court down at the county seat on Wednesdays." "When's Wednesday?" She smiled. "Tomorrow." But that night, before any of that, we got a different kind of visit. Silas and I were back at the house, and an old man came walking up the lane in the last of the daylight. Big shoulders, gaunt, stooped, a face like creased leather, and hands the size of dinner plates. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and he looked up at the house for a long moment, like it hurt him to see it. "You'd be Calder's kids," he said. His name was Dorsey Kemp. Dorse, everybody called him. He'd been a logger 40 years, until his back gave out, and now he fixed engines and small machines for folks up and down the valley. He'd known my father, worked alongside him here and there. He helped us get the generator running that first evening, coaxed it to life with a coffee can of gas and a long string of curses. And when the first bare bulb flickered on in the kitchen, Silas actually whooped out loud, and even Dorse cracked a smile. He showed us how to patch the roof, how to safely tear out the rotten porch and frame a new one with the lumber from the barn. He came back the next few days too, gruff and quiet. And he never once asked us for a single thing. I trusted him. That's the part I want you to remember. I trusted Dorsey Kemp. Wednesday morning, I put on the only clean shirt I had. And Maribeth lent me a good cardigan. And she drove Silas and me 30 miles to the county seat. The courthouse was old red brick, and it smelled of floor wax and 100 years of worry. Judge Adayaz Okafor saw us in her chambers. Not the courtroom. She was a tall woman with iron gray hair and a face that gave nothing away, and eyes that didn't miss a single thing. I laid it all out on her desk, the deed, the Bible, with my birth date, my own birth certificate, and Silas's, and last, with my hand shaking, my father's letter. She read the letter slowly. Her face never changed. When she finished, she folded it with great care and handed it back to me. She leaned back in her chair, and it creaked. "I remember your father," she said. Her voice was low, and even Calder Vance did some work on this very courthouse. The year the roof leaked. Honest work, quiet man, kept to himself. She studied the both of us, and I have had my eye on Sutter Ridge Land Group for some time now. They have made an art of using the tax sale to take family land for pennies. It is perfectly legal." She paused. "And it is not right." She picked up a pen. "The law is a tool, children. It can be used to build, or it can be used as a hammer to break things. Sutter Ridge swings it like a hammer." She looked at me hard. "I prefer to build." And she began to write. She made a summary judgment, right there. She declared, on the evidence before her, which she called compelling, and frankly irrefutable, that Cora Vance and Silas Vance were the lawful heirs of Calder Vance. And she ordered the clerk to draw up the papers of succession by the end of the day. I was so stunned I could barely speak. "But probate," I stammered. "The clerk said it takes months." "Probate is for when the facts are in dispute," she said. "These facts are clear as snowmelt. Your father left a holographic will. He left a Bible with your birthdays pricked into the page. He left you a farm. The only thing in dispute is whether this court will let a predatory company use a loophole to steal a good man's legacy from his children." She set down the pen, and the answer to that is no, not on my watch. I'm going to be honest with you, for about 10 minutes, walking out of that courthouse into the cold sunshine, with the succession papers in my hand and the cash in my bag, I thought we had won. I thought it was going to be easy from here. I was wrong about that. Nothing about this had been easy, and nothing was about to start, because we drove straight to the tax office, and I walked up to the counter, and I slid the court order and the box of cash across to the same clerk I'd spoken to on the phone. And I watched her face go from surprise to something else. She made a phone call, a quiet one, with her hand cupped over the receiver, and then a man came out from a back office, a man in an expensive suit that did not belong in a county tax office in the Bitterroot foothills, silver at his temples, a smile that never once reached his eyes. "Miss Vance," he said, like he already knew me. "Lonnie Tharp, Sutter Ridge." He had been waiting. That's the thing I understood. Watching him, Tharp had a man at the county courthouse, and the second our succession papers were filed, somebody made a call. And he'd driven straight over to be standing right here when I tried to pay. He was polite. That was the worst part. He was so polite. He told me, in his smooth, quiet voice, that he was glad to see us land on our feet, that the property was a great deal of trouble for two young people with no resources, that it was isolated and falling down and would cost a fortune to fix, that it was, in his words, a burden. "It's our home," I said. "Be that as it may," he said. And he kept right on going. Like I hadn't even spoken, he told me Sutter Ridge would be glad to take the burden off our hands, that they'd pay us, generously, far more than the land was worth. $500,000, he said, cash. The clerk behind the counter actually gasped. $500,000. I want you to understand what that money was to a girl like me. It was college. It was a fresh start, somewhere warm. It was a real roof over my brother's head, food, safety, and never again counting out $200 and a list of shelters. A year ago, I would have taken that money so fast it would have made his head spin. It was the easy wrong my father wrote about, standing right there in front of me, in a $1,000 suit. "No," I said. His smile thinned. "Miss Vance, be reasonable. We are developing that entire valley. We have the permits. We have the investors. Your 63 acres is an inconvenience." He let that sit a second, and we will acquire it, one way or another. We can do this the easy way, he paused, or we can make it very, very difficult for you. It was a threat, plain as day, in a public office. And then he played his real card. I'd hate, he said softly, for the county to take an interest in the fact that you've got a 15-year-old ward of the state living out there with you, with no guardian on record, that kind of thing. Well, it could get a young woman in a great deal of trouble, custody trouble. He glanced over at Silas, who'd gone white. It would be a shame to separate the two of you, after everything. There it was. He'd found the one thing I was most afraid of in this world, and he put his thumb right down on it because he was right. Silas had no guardian. I'd taken a minor across 3 counties without telling a soul. And a man with money and lawyers could pick up a phone and have my brother taken away from me and call it concern for a child's welfare. The old fear came roaring back. The feeling of being small, powerless, a case file, a problem for the state. I looked at Silas, and I saw that same fear on his face. Fear of being sent back, of being split up again, of losing the one good thing we'd just found. And something hardened in me. I had spent 10 years letting other people decide what happened to us. I was done. You go ahead and call, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Call the county. And while you're at it, you can explain to Judge Okafor why a land company is threatening 2 orphans in a public office to scare them off their own father's farm. I picked up my bag. We have a lawyer, too. I didn't, not yet. And we have neighbors, and we have all the time in the world. So, no, Mr. Tharp, the land is not for sale. I turned to the clerk. Please count the money, I said. I'd like to pay the taxes my father saved up to pay. The clerk counted it twice, with Tharp standing there the whole time, his jaw gone tight. 52,300. And then a little more on top. My father had saved extra, the way he always thought of everything. She stamped the receipt, paid in full. The sound of that stamp coming down was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my life. The property was ours. Free and clear. Redeemed. Tharp didn't say another word. He just looked at me for a long moment. And there was no politeness left in his face now. Just cold, flat anger. And then he turned and he walked out. I should have felt triumphant, but watching him go, I had a cold feeling I couldn't shake. Because men like that don't lose. They regroup, and I was right to be afraid. The blow came 3 days later. We were back at the farm, and things were almost starting to feel hopeful. We'd patched the worst of the roof. Dorse had the generator humming. Maribeth had brought us a whole box of food and a quilt that smelled like wood smoke and lavender. And then a sheriff's deputy came up the lane and handed me a stack of papers. A temporary restraining order. Sutter Ridge was claiming that the only road to our farm, the lane, the dirt track through the blackberries, crossed a corner of land they'd bought from a neighbor. They were claiming it was their access road, and they'd gotten a judge down in the city, not Okafor, to sign an order barring us from using it until the dispute was settled. In plain words, we were trespassers on the only road to our own home. And there was more in the stack, a formal complaint filed with the county reporting an unsupervised minor Silas living in unsafe conditions, requesting a welfare check and a custody review. Tharp had done exactly what he said he'd do. He couldn't take the land with money anymore, so he was going to take it with paper. He was going to bleed us dry with lawsuits and tie us up in court. And worst of all, he was going to try to take my brother away until we got so tired and so scared that we sold, just to make it all stop. That night was the lowest I'd felt since the morning I signed my name out of the system. And then it got worse, because that same night, Dorse came to the house. And he wouldn't look me in the eye. He stood there on our half-finished porch with his hat in his big hands, turning it round and round. And he told me the thing that nearly broke me. He'd worked for Sutter Ridge 2 years back, when his back first went and the money got tight. Lonnie Tharp had paid him quiet cash every month to do one simple thing to tell Sutter Ridge which of the old parcels in the valley were sitting empty, whose taxes were falling behind, which families had died off or moved away and left land that could be picked up cheap at a tax sale. He had been their scout. He'd helped them find the very weak spots they were now using to take homes all over the valley. And God help me, he was the one who told them about the Vance place. 10 years ago, he had put our farm on Lonnie Tharp's list. I have to stop because I want you to feel this the way I felt it. This man had fixed our generator. He'd taught my brother how to swing a hammer. He had come back day after day and asked for nothing. I had trusted him completely, and he was the reason Sutter Ridge knew our farm existed at all. He was, in a way, the reason we were about to lose it. Have you ever had that happen? Trusted somebody all the way down, let them all the way in, and then found out they'd had a hand in your hurt the whole time? I felt sick. I wanted to scream at him to get off our land. But Maribeth, who was standing right beside me, she put her hand on my arm, and she said, "Quiet. Let him finish, Cora." So I let him finish. Doris said he'd quit Sutter Ridge a year ago, when he finally understood what he was a part of. When he watched a widow he'd gone to church with get put out of the house her husband built. He said he couldn't sleep anymore. And then he told me the thing that changed the whole shape of the fight. He said that 10 years ago, after my father's accident, it was Doris who'd helped bury him. There hadn't been any family to do it, and the county wanted to do it cheap and quick. And Calder Vance had been a friend. So Doris had seen to it himself. And the night before my father, knowing, I understood now exactly what was coming, my father had come to Doris. And he'd given him something, a package, sealed with instructions to keep it safe. And to give it to his children if they ever came back, and only if a man named Tharp ever came after the land. I didn't know what was in it, Doris said, his voice cracking. I just knew Calder was scared of that name. And then the years went by, and I figured you kids were never coming. And I tried to forget I ever heard the name Tharp. He looked up at me, finally, and his eyes were wet. But here you are, and here he is, and I have carried that package 10 years. He set a flat, sealed parcel down on the porch rail. It's yours. I'm sorrier than I know how to say. We opened it at the kitchen table, the four of us, by the light of a single bulb. Inside was a thick folder of papers, and it took me a while to understand what I was looking at. But Maribeth, who'd lived in that valley 40 years, she understood it fast, and her hand came up over her mouth, because the papers told a story. My father had not been hiding from a faceless gang of strangers, the way I'd imagined when I read his letter. The men he'd owed all those years ago, the men whose reach he'd run from, they hadn't faded away into the past. They'd gone respectable. They'd taken their money and they'd put on suits. And over 20 years, they had built it into something legal, a company, a land company, that bought up failing properties in poor rural counties and turned them over for a profit. The company was Sutter Ridge Land Group, and the man at the top of it, the man my father had owed, the man he had faked his own death to escape, he had a son who'd taken over the family business and made it shine and cleaned up the name. Lonnie Tharp, the polite man in the expensive suit, the man who'd offered me $500,000 and threatened to take my brother. He was the son of the very man my father had died to get away from, and he had no idea who we were. To him, we were just two more orphans on a parcel of land that fit his map. He didn't know that the farm he was trying to take was the very fortress that Calder Vance had built to keep his children safe from Lonnie's own. But my father had known. My father had seen it coming somehow 10 years out. He'd known that if anyone ever came for the land, it would be them. And he'd left us the one thing that could stop them, because that folder held proof. Old records, the original debts, the original threats, the laundered money, all of it traced and documented in my father's careful hand. Everything Lonnie Tharp's empire had been built on top of, and spent 20 years trying to bury. It wouldn't send anybody to prison. Most of it was too old for that. But it It was more than enough to ruin a man who'd built his whole fortune on a clean, respectable name. My father, from 10 years inside his grave, had handed us the one weapon Lonnie Tharp could not survive. I need to stop here and just breathe for a second, because when I understood what we were holding, I had to go outside and stand in the dark and look up at the stars my father always wanted to show me. He'd thought of everything: the deed to bring us home, the tools to rebuild, the knowledge to live, the money to pay. And this last and most secret gift to win, he'd reached forward through 10 years and a locked steel box and a dying man's careful planning. And he had protected his children. One more time. If you have ever doubted that the people who loved you are still looking out for you, somehow, even when they're gone, I want you to remember this part of my story, because I did not believe it either. Not until that night. Tell me, before I finish, do you believe the people we lose can still protect us? I would dearly love to know what you think. All right, let me tell you how it ended. I didn't take that folder to the police. My father was right. Most of it was too old to matter to him now. I took it to Lonnie Tharp. Maribeth drove me down to Sutter Ridge's office in the valley, and I walked in, past a startled receptionist, and I set a copy of one single page down on Lonnie Tharp's enormous desk. Just one. Enough to let him know what the rest of it was. I watched his face change. I watched the polite mask come off, and underneath it, for just a second, I saw fear. Real fear. The fear of a man who has built a beautiful house on top of something rotten and just heard the first crack in the foundation. My father's name was Calder Vance, I said. I think your father knew him. He didn't say a word. You're going to drop the road dispute, I said. You're going to withdraw the complaint about my brother, and you're going to leave that valley and every family in it alone. Or every newspaper in this state gets a copy of what's in that folder. And your clean name, Mr. Tharp, the one your father bought with money he took from people just like us, it won't be worth the paper it's printed on. He looked at me for a long, long time. And then Lonnie Tharp, who had offered me $500,000 and threatened to take my brother, did the only thing he could do. He nodded. Sutter Ridge dropped everything inside of a week. The road dispute vanished. The welfare complaint was withdrawn. And within the month, I heard the company quietly sold off most of its holdings in the valley and moved its business to another state. The families in Cedar Hollow got to keep their land. I didn't tell most of them why. I didn't have to. But Maribeth knew, and word has a way of traveling in a small place. And the whole valley seemed to decide all at once that the Vance kids were theirs to look after. They came on a Saturday. I'll never forget it. As long as I live, trucks started coming up our lane in the morning, the road we now legally owned, free and clear, and they didn't stop. Maribeth had organized it, of course. Half the valley showed up with tools and lumber and casserole dishes and a fresh roll of tar paper for the roof. The men raised the porch beams with Doris hollering directions. The women threw open every window in the house and beat 10 years of dust out of the rugs and washed every dish my father had left behind. Somebody brought chickens. Somebody else brought a whole side of beef. By noon, there were folding tables out in the yard, groaning under more food than Silas and I had seen in our entire lives. And they told us stories about our father, the man, not the ghost, that he had a terrible singing voice, but he sang to the goats anyway when he passed Maribeth's place, that he once pulled a neighbor's dog out of a flooded culvert and caught pneumonia for his trouble, that he always paid cash and always tipped too much, that he talked about his kids to anyone who would listen and showed off the drawings he'd made of a yellow bedroom. They weren't just rebuilding a house. They were giving us back our father, piece by piece, story by story, and they were telling us, in the only language a small town really has, that we belonged. There's only one part left to tell you. That night, after everyone had gone home, and the house was quiet and clean and warm with electric light, Silas and I sat down on the floor of the living room, and I took out the little cassette recorder. I'd carried it in my pocket for 2 weeks. I hadn't been ready. I don't think I could have survived hearing his voice before then. But now, with the taxes paid and the fight won and the house full of our father's furniture polished bright, now I was ready. I pressed play. There was a hiss of old tape, and then, after 10 years of silence, I heard my father's voice. It was deep, and it was gentle, and it was so full of love that it crossed 10 years and his own death to reach us, right there on that floor. "Hi, kids," he said. "If you're hearing this, it means you did it. You found your way home." Silas reached over and gripped my hand, hard. The tape was only about 10 minutes long, but those 10 minutes rearranged everything inside of me. He didn't talk about the danger. He didn't talk about the past, or the men, or the choice he had made. Not one single word of any of it. He talked about the farm. He told us how deep the well was, and the trick to priming the pump on a cold morning. He told us which of the wild apple trees in the overgrown orchard gave the sweetest fruit. The third one from the fence, he said. Every time. He told us about a patch of wild strawberries down by the creek that come ripe in the first week of June. He told us to watch the tall fir at the edge of the property come spring because a pair of eagles nested there, and if we were quiet, we'd get to see them teach the young ones how to fly. He wasn't giving us instructions. He was giving us a tour of his heart, showing us one by one all the things he'd loved about this place, all the things he had dreamed of, showing us himself, all the small, ordinary wonders he never got to share. "This land is stubborn," he said, and his voice crackled on the old tape. "But it's honest. It'll test you. It'll break your back and freeze your fingers. But if you listen to it, if you're good to it, it'll be good to you. It'll provide. It'll be a home." And then he was quiet a moment. We heard him take a breath. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Both of you. I always was. From the day you were born till the day I had to go. There was never 1 second I wasn't proud." And then, just before the click, just before the tape ran out into empty, hissing silence, he said one last thing, soft, almost a whisper. "Welcome home." We sat there in the dark a long time after the tape ended. I wasn't crying the way I'd cried that first night. These were different tears. They didn't hurt. They felt like something setting down a weight it had carried too far for too long. The ghost I'd come chasing wasn't a ghost at all. He was an architect, a gardener, a father who had planted a seed of hope 18 years ago in a clearing in the Bitterroot foothills and tended it with everything he had, and then trusted the two of us to come and bring in the harvest. And that was 3 years ago now. I'd love to tell you it was easy after that, but you've come too far with me for me to lie up to you now. It wasn't. The first winter nearly beat us. We lost a whole crop to a late frost the second spring. There were nights Silas and I ate beans by candlelight and wondered what on earth we'd done. But we stayed. I read every book in that footlocker. Twice. I took classes online at the community college, agriculture, and a little business. Silas grew 6 inches and learned to drive the old tractor Doris helped us fix. And somewhere in there, he stopped being a boy I had to protect and became a young man who protected me right back. I became Silas's legal guardian. Judge Okafor saw to it herself. And the day the papers came through, she shook both our hands and told us our father would be proud. And I had to look up at the ceiling just to keep from crying in her chambers. Maribeth taught me to keep goats and to throw a pot on her old wheel. Dorse comes by every Sunday still, and we long ago forgave him. Because a man who carries a secret for 10 years to protect his friend's children is not a man you turn away. He's family, we just didn't know it yet. The house has fresh white paint now. The porch is straight and strong. The yellow room is my office, where I plan out the seasons. And the rocking horse still sits in the corner. And I keep my father's letters in the cedar box on the desk, right where he left them. We didn't get rich. We didn't travel the world. We chose the harder right, and it turned out to be the best thing I ever did. So that's my story. It isn't a fairy tale. The scars of those 10 years in the system, they're still there. They don't just go away. But out here, on this stubborn, honest land my father built for us, they don't get to decide who I am anymore. I learned something finding my way to Cedar Hollow. I learned that home isn't a thing you're given. It's a thing you find, and then fight for, and then build, with your own two hands and the broken pieces you were handed. I learned that the people who love you can protect you in ways you won't understand for years and years. And I learned that you are never, not ever, as alone in this world as you think you are. There's a man buried out under the big fir tree now at the edge of our property. We moved him there with the county's blessing so he could rest on his own land at last. There's a simple stone that just says his name and the dates, and underneath the same two words he left for us on that tape. Thank you for staying with me all this way. I know it was a long road. If this story touched something in you tonight, if it stirred up a memory of your own, of a home you found in an unexpected place, or a love that protected you from the shadows, or a person who's gone now, but somehow still looking out for you, then I would be so grateful if you'd subscribe to this channel. We tell stories about second chances here, about finding family where you least expect it, about coming home. And before you go, do just one thing for me. Leave a comment and tell me this. What matters more, the blood you're born with, or the people who choose to love you? And have you ever, in your whole life, found home in a place you never expected? I'll be reading every single one, because every story matters, and every voice counts. Welcome home.